those cattle for pikerts. I gone down one night in Howard Lake and I had a load of those longhorn cattle of Ole Steens. And they were the real old style doggies, old longhorns. And when one of them would get her head down underneath the rest of the cattle, if you didn't get that cow up, they'd kill her just walking on her. So you had to constantly stop and check your load. And if you had one down, you had to make sure you got her up again. And I got as far as Howard Lake one night with a load of them cattle, and there was one down in there, and I just couldn't get her up. So I looked, and they had this is the middle of the night now, and they had a stockyard there in Howard Lake, the old style stockyard alongside the railroad track. So I looked at the fence, and it's all plank, so I thought, well, that's a pretty good fence. So I closed off a pen and backed my truck up there, and have to let out a few of them cattle so that one can get up. So I'd let a few of them out, and was in the process of getting this one back on her feet when those I'd let out got to milling around down in there, and them old posts in that fence was pretty damn rotten, and lo and behold, they broke the post down and got loose. So we had the cops and just about everybody in Howard Lake out there for a roundup to round all them cattle up, get them back into another pen in the stockyard, and get the fence hung up so we could get them loaded back in a truck. That's not just an easy task with those Texas Longhorn cattle, and they're spooked, and just like any other wild cattle, they'd really stampede. And the little Massey Harris tractors that we sold down there, it was one of the first tractors to come along with foot brakes for individual wheels. So I was demonstrating that to some farmers here one day, and I was steering that tractor. Of course, I was just going slow, but I'd just point my finger at the steering wheel and then step on the brake and then follow the wheel around with my finger. And of course, I'm steering it with the brakes, but it was a good demonstration. Everybody was getting a big kick out of it. And Pikert had some sons that were there, and Garris was the oldest one of them. And of course, he'd saw me doing that. And I guess, I don't know what he thought he was going to do, but he took one of them tractors. That was the old tractor. It was a Massey Harris 101 Junior and a 101 Senior. Well, he'd taken one of those 101 Seniors and gone uptown and driving it around uptown on a Saturday when there was a lot of farmers in town, and he put her over in high gear, and he was coming back down the road to the blacksmith shop, and I guess he thought he was just going to whip a Louie right there in front of the blacksmith shop, because he come up there and jammed on one of them brakes and was going to spin that tractor around. Well, he did, but he just rolled her right on over. Now, why it didn't kill him, I don't know, but he lived through it. But he learned something, that you don't turn the tractor like that when you're in high speed, especially a tricycle tractor. And we got along to December 41, and the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. Now, there was quite a family of Niggs lived around Browns Valley there, and there was Tony and Louie, and I can't remember the other older ones, but they all had some sons. Now, these boys were all cousins, and they'd all gone into the Navy together, and there was 3 of those Nig boys were killed out there at Pearl Harbor, and it was quite a sad thing, but anyhow, it was all gung-ho then. Elmer had just about had his year in and for the draft, and was just about ready to get out when this all happened, but of course that ended any possibility of him getting out. So now we have to decide what we're going to do. I would like to have gone out on a farm, but there was no possibility of getting out on a farm then, because when that draft had started, many of the people around town, some of them weren't even farmers and that had sons in college, they all grabbed up all the land that was available around there and get their sons out of college and get them out on the farms to keep them out of the draft. Well, about this time I decided, well, I got to do something about this. I better go down to the city and go to work down there. And so I made a deal to sell all the household goods. And left the money with Mom except $5. I took the $5 and went down to the city, hitchhiked a ride down there, and I knew some people. Some Martins was their name. I got acquainted with them because Mrs. Martin's mother lived across the road from us in Browns Valley, and we got acquainted with them during the time I had that broken leg. But I got a job at Waldorf Paper Products. Got a job as a mechanic out there, and in the meantime, I was looking around at some of the defense jobs where the bigger money was, and they were just starting to. They had broke ground, and they're just starting to build that arsenal out there, so I went out there and put in my application, told them I was a hydraulic engineer, because I'd heard by the grapevine that they needed something like that. So it wasn't very long when I was called out there to go out as a hydraulic engineer and to put together some hydraulic extrusion presses. So I'd never seen one before, but I had some kind of working idea of hydraulics, so it wasn't too big a problem. But in the meantime, I'd rented a house at Rice and Front Street in St. Paul. And one of the few times in my life I ever bought anything on time. I went down and bought all new furniture and put in that house. And then I went to work out at the arsenal. And once in a while I'd worked a few extra days. A guy wanted me to work as a bartender. Well, I worked a couple days down there as a bartender at Dutch's Bar on Rice Street, but it didn't take me long to find out that that wasn't a job for me, because I was too much of a hothead. I was too inclined to try to throw people out, that getting a little mouthy at the bar, so I didn't stay there very long. But we wanted to buy a house, and at that time when you'd buy a house you had to have at least 1/3 down. So I took an extra job then, besides working at the arsenal. I took a job driving cab nights in St. Paul. And I tell you, nobody's education is complete until they've seen the seamier side of life. There you see the scum when you take on a job as a cab driver. While we were there, I'd taken Gail. She hadn't been uptown much, and I had to go down to the Pioneer Building to pay my rent. So I took Gail with me one day, and took her on the streetcar. We got on the Rice Street car, and we went downtown and got off there at the Pioneer Building. And when I got off, I found out my dog had followed me. That same old dog that jumped up on the checker table there in Beardsley. And so I told him to stay, and he stayed outside the building. And we went in the Pioneer Building, and I had to go up, I think it was the 5th floor. So we got in the elevator, and we rode up. I went up there and paid my rent. But Gail wouldn't get in that elevator to come back down again. She had all of that elevator she wanted. There's no way. She just would panic. So we had to walk back down. I guess it was probably 5 floors. But we got back down and went out and got on a streetcar, and the old dog started following the streetcar. But when we got up to Rice and Como, we turned off from University Avenue and Wabasha, and there's a whole flock of different streetcars comes that same route. And when we went up there to go home, of course the Rice Street car went straight north there, but the Como Avenue car turned and went up Como Avenue. That was Como Harriet, went clear over into Minneapolis. And when we were pulling away from that intersection, I see my dog was following that Como Harriet streetcar. So he got confused and was following the wrong streetcar, and he was gone for, it must have been 2 or 3 months. And we figured, well, we'd never see him again. And then one day the kids was out in the yard playing, and all of a sudden they were hollering, "Oh, Mama, here's Tippy. Tippy is back again." Of course, Mama didn't believe it, but she went out, and then sure enough, here he was, and he had a rope burn on his neck. And somebody had caught him and had him tied up, but he evidently he'd gotten himself loose. But old Tippy was quite an interesting dog. He didn't like drunks. He couldn't stand anybody that had been drinking. And one night there was a big whoop-de-doo out front, and I had stopped at a bar on the way home too, and I wasn't in too good shape when I got home, so I didn't get to see all this here rumpus that went on outside. But Tippy, I suppose he was a little mad because I'd got plastered, because that didn't please him at all. And he was outside, and some drunk had staggering around there on the sidewalk, and Tippy had got after him, and the guy had tried to climb the fire alarm pole there on the corner, and of course Tippy was right on him, and the guy, I don't know whether he intended to or not, but he turned in a fire alarm, and the fire trucks came and all this, but Mother seen what was going on. She'd opened the door and called Tippy and got him back in the house. But the firemen came along, and then the cops came, and they pulled the poor pilgrim down off of the pole, and I suppose he had to go and spend a little time in jail. And old Petey, he could walk around and quite an independent guy. And one day, kids come in and say, "Hey, Mama, Petey is missing." And I was home then. I was working nights. I had socks on, a pair of pants. I slipped a pair of pants on, went running out and run across the empty lot next to us, and it was full of sandburrs. So I had my socks full of sandburrs and take off down there and in the meantime I got out there on Rice Street, and I could look down about 3 blocks out there, and there I see a little guy walking down the street there window shopping. And well, I told Mom where he was, so Mom then took off after him, and I had to sit down on the curb there and pull all the sandburrs out of my socks. Finally decided to just take the damn socks off and go barefooted, but anyhow, we got Pete back. He hadn't bought anything. He just window shopping. And one day, after I'd worked days for a while, I was upstairs trying to sleep. And we had a family lived next door to us. Her name was Reinhardt. And I was having a little problem trying to sleep in the daytime, and I was upstairs and I had the windows open. It was hot there in that house. And pretty soon I could hear Mr. Reinhardt cursing and swearing and telling some kid to get off the grass. Well, he always did that at his own kids, so I didn't think nothing of it till I heard a voice down below the window said, "You better not talk to me that way, or my daddy will come out and beat the hell out of you." And of course Reinhardt, he knew that I wasn't home, so he swore and cursed and said, "Tell your damn dad to come out." So at that time I stuck my head out the window and I said, "Mr. Reinhardt, that kid ain't fooling you one little bit." So it was a big surprise to Mr. Reinhardt, but he decided it was time to leave anyhow, so he took off and left. Quite an interesting family to live next to it. It was only about 8 feet between the two houses, so a lot of interesting little things went along there. I drove the cab until we'd had enough for a down payment, and then Ma went out cruising around daytime looking for places while I was working. And we finally bought a house at 1103 Chatsworth in St. Paul. And we went to St. Andrew's Parish over there. And first Sunday after we was living over there, we went to church, and I think it was a 9 o'clock mass we went to, and the priest was a very interesting fellow that we talked to. We listened to and give his sermon, and he'd drape himself over that podium up there and really give a sermon, so everybody was hanging on every word he said, and he was such an interesting talker. And of course, it was quite a big parish, and I never went up to get acquainted with him, but he had an accent when he talked, so Mother and I, we got to calling him the converted Swede. So we had quite an experience with him later on, which I'll tell you about in this story. But we lived in that house there in Chatsworth. It didn't have a full basement under it, so I decided to dig the basement out, and I remodeled. I took a partition out and opened up an enclosed stairway. Then instead of having a small living room with an enclosed stairway in the hallway, I had a bigger living room with an open stairway, and a few goody things like that. I dug the basement under it, and Pete was always there to help. Whatever I was doing, Pete had to be helping me. So when I was doing the remodeling, of course he was right there, so busy all the time. I was afraid I might hurt him or something. So I set a bag of nails up the top of the stairs, and then I tell him, Petey, you go up and get me a nail. So he'd climb one step at a time, slide his little hind end up on one step and then up on the other, and go all the way up the top of the stairs and get one nail and bring it down, and I'd tell him thank you and then send him after another one. So I kept him pretty busy. And in the meantime, the war was going quite bad. Every time you pick up the paper, we'd had another defeat someplace, and we'd lost the Philippines, and we'd lost Wake Island, and we lost Guam. So it wasn't a pleasant time at all as far as the news was concerned. And while we were living there, we'd gone out to the beach one day and had the kids all along. And Pete was always a little pistol around the lake. He just had no fear of the water at all. You just didn't dare let him loose. So we get out there for a picnic. I told Mom and the rest of the kids, you go on out and have a good time, and I'll watch Pete. And then after you've had a dip and a swim and everything, you come back and you watch, and then I'll go out swimming. So I watched him there and played with him in the water and whatnot. And Mom and the kids had gone out. Betty Piaski was with us. And finally she came back in again and said, okay, I'll keep an eye on him now. You can go out and take a swim. So there was a raft out there, which was a fairly long swim for me. So I had swam out there, and I just got out to the raft and kind of winded a little bit, and I got up on the raft. And I hear the big rumpus up on the beach, and I could hear Mom and the kids screaming and hollering, we can't find Pete. Well, I just knew that he'd walked off the end of the dock and jumped in or something like that, because he had no fear of the water at all. So I turned right around and swim back, and I gets back to the end of the dock where I had him jumping off. So when I was still winded, as soon as I got back to the end of the dock, I was grab a lungful of air and dive down in there and look around on the bottom and come up again and grab a lungful of air. And boy, I was seeing stars. My ears was about busting, and I could hear them hollering and hollering. And I guess Mother had gone back up to the car and found him, and here he was. He'd got hungry. He'd gone up to the car and opened up the picnic lunch and was having a little feed up there. So meanwhile, out there at the arsenal, I got my basement built anyhow, and remodeled and rewired, and I got a few condemns on there because I hadn't gone to get any permits to do all this. But I was kind of an independent country boy. I figured I didn't need all that stuff. So in December of 1942, Bill was born, and Aunt Dean was down there, and I had a V8 Ford about that time, and Bill Spindler was there too, and they'd given Mother some dope to induce labor, and it didn't seem to work very much. So Dean was there in the house with Mom. So I said, well, I got to go out and get a little fresh air. I'm going to go out for a walk in Como Park. So Bill Spindler and I were out there walking in Como Park, always keeping an eye back there in the house. And about that time, I see Dean come running out to the car, waving her arms. So we trotted back up there, and we didn't have much time to spare. But see, right now things was happening very fast, so we got Mom in the car, and I took off had to go down to St. Joseph's Hospital, and I went down Chatsworth down to Front Street, turned east on Front Street, and get down there to where Front Street and Dale and well, there's another street comes in there, and anyhow, it's a six-way corner, and the red light was on, and the intersection was full. I didn't have no place to get through, and I ain't got time to stop for no red light, so I went right up on the sidewalk with my old V8 Ford and went right on through the red light, and going on my way downtown. We made it down to the hospital and took Ma in, and my sister was going to take time to fill out some papers and whatnot. And I said, hey, you ain't got time for that. So they took her into the room, and Bill was born in a very few minutes. We didn't have too much to spare. So in the meantime, there was a deferment went along with the job I had out there at the arsenal. I'd got those extrusion presses all in and got them running, and my hydraulic engineer job was ended there, and they wanted to send me on to Philadelphia for the company, the Bliss Machine Company, and I didn't care to go there, so I transferred over, and I was working for the arsenal then. And there was a lot of petty political stuff goes on out there in a plant like that. Some of the guys that seem to have a little bit of authority, they want you to do things that are not in the best interest of the government or the country, and they're always throwing this deferment up in your face, and I'm getting a little sick of that anyhow. I could see how the war is going for us, and I said, well, they're going to have somebody there that's willing to fight. And then one day I said, well, I don't know who's a better fighter than I am, so I went home, talked it over with Mother, and I said, Mom, I think the way it looks, we're going to have some fighting men, or we're going to lose this war. And I guess that includes me. So I rented my house out, moved my family back to Browns Valley, and entered the Navy. They asked me where I wanted to go. I said, well, the shortest route to get out the job. So they said, oh, we know what that is. That's the amphibs in the Navy, and it was right about that. That's where they put me. So I was in the Navy. I'd gone through my boot camp, and they'd sent me to. I'd scored real high on engineering rates, so they'd sent me down to hydraulic engineering down at University of Iowa at Ames. You take it in 8 weeks, or you take their 4-year engineering course. So I went to school down there, and then I got in the high 10% of the class there, so I was sent on to advanced diesel engineering at Ford's River Rouge plant down in Dearborn, Michigan. And but when I was home on boot leave, our baby Helen was born, and she was born the day after I got home on boot leave, and so she lived a couple of days, and then she had this RH blood factor, and she just bled to death out through her pores, and of course our baby had died, and quite a sad homecoming, and I asked for an extension on my leave home, but the war was going really bad at that time, and they weren't giving too many furloughs. They didn't have to, so that request was denied. So I had to go back. I was rather bitter about that, but I did go back, and I was out I was ready to take off for sea duty, and I had got assigned to a seaplane tender, and we took off out of Long Beach, California, and I had made a few fast transfers about that time, and we were out at sea then, and Eddie Rickenbacker, the old World War I ace, he was doing research work for the Navy, and and the plane that he was flying had gone down somewhere between the States and Pearl Harbor. So there was a lot of ships out there looking for him. As a matter of fact, he was out there for 52 days, and they'd given up ever finding him. When they finally did find him and his crew in a raft, and they saved them all. But we were out there. I was working on a seaplane tender, and we were taking part in that search for Eddie Rickenbacker. And we got a radiogram one day, and it said, "Come home, your father died." Well, that's sad news at any time. But I'm out here at sea, and this ship ain't going back stateside. But then our executive officer come along, and he said, if you can be ready in 5 minutes, you can get on that seaplane that we're gassing up right now, and that's heading back for Long Beach and San Diego. If you can be ready in 5 minutes, you can get on that plane, but you can't take any baggage with you, only your ditty bag. So I was ready in 5 minutes, and I got on that plane, and that was the old Goonie Bird. According to all aviation engineering, that ship is like a bumblebee, and it's not supposed to be able to fly, but it does. It was the old workhorse of the Navy during the war. But after an awfully long taxiing trip, when you thought the bottom was going to rip out of it and all that, she finally was airborne, and I did eventually get back to Long Beach, and then I went to San Diego, and then I went to Amarillo, Texas, and all on emergency leave. So you got priority on all NATS, that's Navy Air Transport Service, but you can't really pick your route. So I went by the way of Amarillo, Texas, and then to Olathe, Kansas, which is the airport for Kansas City, and then to Chicago, and then from Chicago back to Minneapolis. After I got in Minneapolis, and of course there's no more air rides, so I take the Great Northern Railroad train to Morris, and then from Morris I take the old Toonerville, which goes out west of Browns Valley. And of course I'm feeling awfully sad, and there was no dates on this radiogram and everything, so I'm expecting to get there to find my dad is gone and buried. And in the meantime, Squint had the dray route in Browns Valley, and he'd go and meet the train and pick up the mail and haul it up to the post office and distribute the freight around to the different places. And I got into Browns Valley, and that's early in the morning. It's about 7:30, and I'm just going to get off of the old Toonerville, and who should I see standing here on the depot platform but my dad, waiting for the mail. He was helping Squint with the dray line, and of course I'm awfully happy to see that. I said, boy, this is a big error, but I like it. I'm glad we, to get out here and get a leave and come home. I'm glad to see you. But then I found out that it was Josephine's dad, Grandpa Pete, that had died. It wasn't my dad at all, so that kind of took some of the joy out of finding my own dad alive. But I did get a leave, which the last one I was to have for quite some time. And then, of course, when I went back, I went through amphib training down at the Strand in San Diego, and had a few adventures down there. But during the war, I was up to the Illusions, and found out that the Japs hadn't stayed there. They'd gone up and taken the Illusions, and then I guess after they got there, they couldn't find out what they were going to do with them. And we got up there to try to take them back, but we got there, we found out the Japs had gone. And now I've been to the Illusions, but I can honestly say that I have never seen them because it was so foggy. When the landing craft, the bow would hit the beach on the Illusions, I couldn't see anything but fog. So I can truthfully say I've never seen the Illusion Islands. Then the first major action I saw was in the invasion of the Philippines, when we went back and invaded Leyte and Samar at the same time, and quite a bit of unpleasant experience. And I went to a little island of Tababo. We formed up again, and then the amphibs, it's their job to go on the beach and claw out a toehold and set up the beach markers and direct the traffic for the Marines to come in. So when the Marines do come in, it's an orderly landing, that the crews and the tanks and their fuel and their ammunition and all of that stuff get together at one spot on the beach. Without that, there would just be such confusion you never could establish a beachhead. So this was the job of the amphibs, to go in there and claw out that toehold. Well, after Lady and Samar, then we went to a little bitty island right down at the toe end of the big Luzon, and there was a little small island, so we went in there at 0500 in the morning to claw out a toehold. But when we got there, there weren't too many Japs on there, and we kind of went through that island like a dose of salt, and the Marines never did have to land, because by 9 o'clock we had the island secured. We'd kind of mopped up, and there just were no more living Japs on that island. And the Seabees followed us in, and by noon the Seabees had a mess hall erected on that island, and we had our noon meal in the mess hall built by the Seabees when we just hit that beach at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then they set up some Quonset huts, and then while we were reforming, we were assigned to that island for a few days. And on that, I had the experience of seeing starving, bloated kids for the first time in my life. And it's very unpleasant. One can never appreciate starvation and poverty in this earth until you've seen something as pitiful as those kids with those extended stomachs and big joints, big elbows, and the hollow look in their eyes. And when the Seabees had set up that mess hall there on Tababo, we went in there to have our first meal that evening, and we had gone in and filled our trays and sat down to eat. And these mess halls was built with a low wall all the way around the outside, and then screened from there on up to the roof, and all the way around this mess hall. Now, where all these civilians came from, I haven't the slightest idea where they were when all the shooting and the fighting was going on that island, but as soon as it was over, they seemed to appear out of everywhere, and here all these kids were standing around the outside of that mess hall with them big hollow eyes staring at us, and it's pretty hard to eat when you're under conditions like that. So I took all the dry food that I could, and I slipped it inside of my shirt. We just wore dungarees and blue shirts and a skivvy shirt. So I slipped all the dry food like bread and all that sort of thing that I could inside of my shirt. Because when you go out of that mess hall, they got guards standing there with bayonets to keep the civilians out of the slop barrel, where you take your tray and you bang it against the board and dump all the uneaten food into one of the barrels, and then you plunge your tray down into another barrel between some brushes and more or less give it the first rinse, and then throw it on a pile as you went out. But they had to have guards standing there with bayonets to keep these kids from diving into that garbage pail to eat. So as soon as I got a little ways away from the mess hall, I just opened up my shirt and hold that bread and stuff out. Those kids soon got to know who was going to do that, because they'd just mob you when you'd come out of that place. So while I was over in the Pacific during the war, I had a little camera that I carried in my pocket. It's called a little Falcon camera. It would fit in your shirt pocket. I have a good many pictures I took. Some I took on Lady in Samar, and some I took on Tobago, and some of them I took on a bigger island at Luzon. We established two more beachheads there in the Philippines Islands, one at Subic Bay, and then the last one up at Lingayen Gulf. It's up there at Lingayen Gulf that I got a Jap 25 bullet hole through my left ankle. It didn't hit any of the bones in there. It just went through the thin part of my ankle, and I didn't realize I had that in there until sometime afterward. But I'd got that in my foot while I was sitting on a cat. We'd been sent in there with a bunch of caterpillars trying to rescue the Army tanks that had been mired down in the rice paddies when the Japs had blew the cement road out. So they'd got those tanks all mired in there, so they sent us in there with a bunch of cats to try to pull them out. So I made those beachheads there at Subic Bay, and we set up a Navy repair shop there, and I guess that's still in operation. But there was an old Spanish arch there, and after we'd established the beachhead, and then the amphibs was kept in there for a while to stand outer perimeter guards. There was no organized resistance for the Japs there anymore, but the jungle and area was full of scattered Jap stragglers, and they'd try to come into the camp at night and steal some food and, I suppose, clothing or whatever. And we used to get some of them just about every night coming in there. But we set up some generator units. I was a diesel engineer, so of course I'm assigned to anything that runs by diesel, and the generator units that supplied electric power for the whole base were, most of them were Caterpillar diesel engines running a generator. And we had these scattered throughout the camps, different spots throughout the camp. This was going to be a big machine shop and Navy supply depot and whatnot. So the mess hall was somewhere near this Spanish arch. I have, among my pictures is a picture of that Spanish arch. And at night when we'd have to go around and log these engines every hour, we would travel in pairs because of the Japs that were scattered through there. But sometimes we'd cheat a little bit and we'd get toward the center of the camp. We'd split up so we both wouldn't have to walk so far in the mud or travel around so far. And this Spanish arch had a roof over it, and one of the guys must have had a pet monkey, because when he'd gone into the chow hall, of course you can't take the monkey in there, and he evidently had left this little monkey up in that Spanish arch to keep out of the mud and the rain. But see, monkeys, they hate to get wet. And my partner and I came out of this chow hall, and we split just before we got to the Spanish arch, and he was going to go one way and I was going to go the other. And when he'd gone through that Spanish arch, I heard him let out a scream and yell, and we carried these grease guns. It's 45 caliber. Probably you'd call it a machine pistol today, but it carried 30 rounds of 45 caliber bullets, and they spit them out pretty fast. They weren't very accurate because they only had a little 7-inch barrel on them. But anyhow, this monkey jumped down on that guy's back when he went through that arch. And of course he thinks he's jumped by the Jap, and in the dark and the confusion we can't see, and he threw the little monkey off his back and into the mud, and I could hear the feet are running and pattering in the mud, which of course I think is a Jap too. So I blasted away at the sound, and so did he. And then after you once heard bullets hit flesh, you know when that happened. We heard the cry and the scream, and so then we circled around and come up on the spot where we thought our Jap was going to be laying. Here was that little monkey. We both took a shot at him and blasted him out. The poor little rascal, all he wanted to do was keep his feet dry. The biggest action I seen during the war was, of course, the beach at Iwo Jima, which was quite messy, and I suppose you read about it in your history books. I was in on the first wave, and there wasn't really too much action then, but I went in again on the fifth wave, and by that time all hell had broke loose. There's no way to describe to anybody what it's like to hit a beachhead under fire, and the dying and the screaming and the smoke and the noise and the stench. And I got nicked in the neck with shrapnel while we were establishing this beachhead at Iwo Jima. And also, when we were making a run on that beach, I had a terrific toothache. Oh, just a throbbing toothache that was an eye tooth, and was just driving me crazy. And all this shell fire, the heavy 16-inch guns, and then the rocket fire and everything going over your head. It seems like it increases the air pressure a whole lot. And that tooth was throbbing in the top of my head, and I finally grabbed onto it with a pair of vice grip pliers, and I just screamed and hollered at the top of my voice. But I did pull that tooth. I suppose it was abscessed, but oh, what a relief that was when that tooth came out. But nobody seemed to pay much attention to me with all the screaming and hollering. With all the excitement that was going on, I suppose if you'd asked the guy next to me what happened, he wouldn't have been able to tell you. But anyhow, I made 2 quick trips over to the hospital ship, the USS Comfort, while we were maneuvering around there outside of Iwo Jima, and we'd hit the beach and all this. And the first thing they do to you when they see blood is they give you a shot of morphine. Every repair station you go by thereafter, the first thing you get is morphine, and I don't know how many thousands of men they hook on that morphine, but I was one of them. I did get addicted to that morphine. There was no problem over there. You could get it quite easily. Another interesting thing that would happen over there after Iwo Jima, we were sent back to the Philippines, and back to that base there at Subic Bay. And our old USS Alchiba by that time had become quite dilapidated. She'd got a good many holes and whatnot. I guess they decided she was no longer seaworthy, and well, we did make one more little beachhead with the Alchiba after that. It was on a little island called Chichijima, just after at the same time the beachhead was established on Okinawa. I never got to Okinawa. I was on one of the outlying islands called Chichijima. And then we went back to the Philippines, to Subic Bay, and there they declared our old tub was unseaworthy, and so then I was assigned to what's called a PC pool, that's patrol craft, and there your job is to you get in these patrol crafts and you go to where the next beach is going to be, to the next action, and you go in there at night with rubber rafts, and you sound out the beach, and you chart how much the tide rises, and how much it falls and how deep the water is and at certain times and what the bottom is like. And whatever the